Welcome to FRC Camp Virtual 2022. This year, we will be organizing different workshops varying from sustainability to production steps to season tips and much more with special guests from all around the world. And now we have Ben with us, and I am Nazlı from Sultans of Turkey.
Hi, I'm Halinur from Sultans of Turkey, and Ben is going to be talking on behalf of First Capital within 3 days, and he's going to tell about strong production steps and giving details such as design, prototyping, and some season tips. Now, welcome, Ben. We are all listening to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Sultans of Turkey. Really happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to come talk through some of the things we've found in the past through Ri3D, and I'm on a team myself, so I can kind of give other insights that we've found with prototyping and things of that nature this year. So with that, hopefully it'll be a fun hour here, and hopefully everyone finds it interesting. So little about me and where I'm kind of getting my data from. Worked for a number of different companies. You can kind of see some of the things I've been involved with over there on the right. I've been involved with FRC for 18 years, senior mentor, been a lead robot inspector. I'm currently a Team 2041 mentor. I did First Capital Ri3D. We did it 2 years. We did it in 2019, 2020. I also did the Team Indiana Ri3D team in 2016. So done Ri3D a few times, very familiar with these very fast builds and getting things working very quickly. Occasionally I contribute through first updates now. So kind of gives you an idea there. And you can check out any of these there's a lot of great companies there that I've worked with, and it's been good. Got a lot of great experiences. Looking a little bit into what where we want to go with this, right? So if you're one of the first things to think about when you have when you go into the season is trying to figure out what your goal is. I've got two of the main things that teams typically have as their goals. You want to win competitions, awards, whatever those may be. And also you want to win in the right way. Obviously winning the right way, that definition varies from team to team. Some teams tend to be a lot on the, we want to have every single action that is done is, done in a specific way. Some are a little bit more fluid with that. Just something to think about as you get started here about knowing where you want to go with it, kind of helps you as you set up all the steps to get there. To use the case example with Ri3D, it's one of the things that really helped us there is especially we all trusted each other going in. Everyone trusted everyone else to do a good job. Everyone knew everyone else's skills. Everyone was prepared for both years that we did it. For the second year, we were less familiar with each other. It was more of a distributed team where we had 24, 25 people from all across different areas of First that were coming in and flying in to do it because they wanted to participate. But it was a lot of alumni, and usually really engaged alumni. You could trust that they would be pretty good at understanding what would work for a mechanism. And then it just kind of became making sure that you had good management and structure around that in order to pull it off very quickly. So, clear defined roles, making sure everyone kind of knows what they need to do, making sure everyone's trained. If you've got all of those things and you've got someone with a decent amount of first institutional knowledge, then you can organize these builds and get them done rather quickly. There are three main things important to make sure you're structured up. It's probably a little late for this season, but for future seasons, knowing the program specific knowledge. So you get that from Chief Delphi, Discord, FRC Discord. There's a number of different regional Discords out there available. And I've got a list at the end that we'll show. The Open Alliance is a good one this year. Obviously, Ri3D teams, knowing that not everyone always makes, you can't necessarily trust always whatever people say on the internet as the best course of action. And what you can see what lots of different people do and see sort of in the aggregate what direction people are finding is the best direction and go in that way. Time, obviously, it's a little bit trickier with the supply chain constraints and everything that everyone has this year. So budgeting time becomes almost even more important. And then money and inventory being the third one. So the sponsorship that you're able to obtain in the off season and build up the parts that you can build quickly, so you have them in stock ready to go, and also the money for working through making your season pull off. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Something to think in terms of what's most important on your robot. So I've put these in order where the most importance at the bottom. If any people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is essentially the needs of a person as they go through their life for what's most important. So psychological, safety, love, belonging, esteem, self-actualization. Put them in context also the robot needs. So in terms of what's most important in order to be successful in FIRST. So number one, first knowledge. That's going to get you more than anything else, having someone who really knows that stuff. Mentorship and team organization, basic fabrication capabilities. Can you cut a piece of metal? Money and sponsorship, basic controls. Can you go to 254 or 1678 or any of these other teams that post their code, understand some of the basic code and throw together a basic program? Or even just, can you go to WPI lib and learn that stuff in a weekend and then get your code made? The CAD, notice CAD's all the way up here. Some teams think CAD is a lot more important. CAD's really not as important. You can hack together a robot without CAD. Any sort of advanced techniques in terms of advanced controls, advanced fabrication, all of this not very important. And obviously decorations almost also not very important in terms of winning competitions. Obviously, if your goals are a little bit different, then maybe some of these change a little bit of order. But in terms of if your goal is playing the game, this is a pretty good stack to look at. So we're going to talk about 2022 robot design. And the reason I have these two robots up here is because I think a lot of robots will end up being a combination of these two robots. They're going to, this being 4414 from their 2021 rebuild ascent. Well, it's not rebuild. Their 2021 robot that they built for the Infinite Recharge season and then played it at Chessie Champs and their own off season, and the 2013 version of 254. The reason being, and you can look up their videos for these robots, there'll be a lot of smaller robots that are able to shoot essentially two balls and pop them in a goal. And a lot of robots that do the monkey bar climb, very similar to what 254 did in 2013 with their pyramid. So you can look up both those videos and take a look at that. I don't have any videos in here, but good robots to look at as examples here. I think a lot of teams will kind of go in this direction. Talking about the game pieces and the elements of this game itself. So this game piece, it's a nice game piece. It indexes very well. They're they slide against each other, so you don't have the stickiness that we had with last year's game piece, where they get stuck in your indexing system. You can do things like put them against a plastic wall and push them against a plastic wall with wheels, and they don't go into odd places, which is very nice. The inflation component of it adds an extra complexity to shooting. So if one ball is 3 psi and one ball is 4 psi, now that they just, with the most recent team update, they're slightly different, then your shooting will be different the more you move away from the goal. So distance shooting gets harder the further you are from the goal because of the inflation complexity. the bounciness adds extra complexity when shooting into the horizontal goal. So if you're shooting a ball and it's if you do it with a single hooded shooter like a lot of teams do, and there's backspin on it, the a lot of backspin on this goal we found that can cause some balls to bounce out. So, really, it's very important to test your mechanisms this year into a horizontal goal. It's very different from shooting into a vertical goal, that as we have in the past. So it seems there's little bits that are plug and play here. It's similar mechanisms. You just have to make adjustments in order to handle these new challenges, and can't you just putting up necessarily a piece of PVC around as a whole probably isn't going to be enough to mimic actual game conditions. And you'll find when you actually get to the event, you'll find you'll run into some issues. The ball also degrades a lot less than the ball in 2020 and 2021, which is nice as well. That adds a little bit of consistency, except on the inflation aspect that I talk about. So different things to worry about, even though it seems like also sometimes just another ball. Um, some tips on intakes. A lot of teams will do that. You'll probably have a roller with squishy wheels, or a roller with Velcro around it, or something like that. There's a couple different options. A lot of teams use the squishy wheels these days. They work very well. They work pretty well on almost every game piece. So definitely worth checking those out. Some general tips on it. There's going to be a lot of contact in this game. There's going to be a lot of teams running around, and your intake's going to be sticking out, and then they'll hit your intake, and then your intake will break. So making your intake pretty robust, testing it out. So running it into a wall, and making sure that it survives. That's generally a good idea, especially in when a robot can run full speed across the field and whack into your intake. That may be something that you'd want to watch for. You're obviously holding two balls, so you've got a two-ball magazine. Whether you're doing low goal or high goal, you're going to want to just position the balls that you want right away. Get them into position so you can get really fast cycles out there. And in intake speed, the rule of thumb is around 1.5 times speed, the surface speed of your robot. That way, when you're running really fast across the field and you suck the balls up, they're not going to bounce away, because if your intake's going slower than your drive, then you can run into problems with balls bouncing away. Some shooting tips. Like I said before, test with an actual goal. There's a bounce out risk this year, so it'd be good. Actual goal or goal replica, you don't necessarily need to spend the money for the official versions. You can build one yourself, but you want to make sure you've got that Lexian cone shape, because you'll find more success if you check that. Shooting locations. I've got this graphic down here at the bottom with these green dots. So it's nice to be able to have at least one location you can go to that has either a flat wall that you can back against for stability, or a protected zone, like we've highlighted the ones that are against the trusses, or a protected zone against like the flat surface against the goal. So I've got the side walls, the goal, and the trusses here. So as long as you can do at least one of those, if you're shooting, that's going to be very you'll find that you'll be able to handle the defense a little better, because there's probably going to be some amount of defense in this game. Obviously, you could practice with another robot playing defense on you, so you could be with another team. Practice with one team doing shooting, and then the other playing defense, and then switch off, and then you can both get really good at that, because that's going to make things easier for you. And then mass it on your flywheel is nice, because then what a lot of teams do there is, if you machine out like a steel flywheel, or if you just buy a heavy COTS wheel, and then put it on there, you can it basically makes it so your shooter doesn't slow down when you push balls through it mechanically, right? And you don't have to worry about that from a code perspective. So it'll make it a lot easier to pop the balls into the goal in a more consistent fashion right after the other. Because if you're sitting and waiting to shoot your second shot, then someone can come play defense on you. For targeting, there's obviously the limelight out there. The flashlight isn't used as much by teams. I'd encourage you to go out there and take a look at this option. Specifically, 973 2020 2021 is probably the best flashlight robot I've ever seen. So check it out. It's basically what you do is you shine a flashlight on the goal, and then your drivers look at it where the flashlight's sitting, and then based on that, fire it in. So you can check that out. It's a very inexpensive way to do targeting. Autonomous zones. So there's really, when I look at the field, this is how I think it'll be divided. There might be some other options, like 1678's already put out a 5-ball auto, so they start with their 1, they grab this one, they go to the second, go to the third, get the one from the human player, and they fire them all in. So you could do a little bit of zone mixing here, but there's a lot of 2-ball auto options and some 4-ball auto options. So when teams get to world championships, they should be able to divide up the field pretty well, that you'd have 2-ball autos, a 4-ball auto, and maybe do something with your opponent's balls. Not necessarily sure on that one yet. For low goal scoring and rungs 1 and 2, suggest everyone just check out the EveryBot. It's probably one of the most elite low goal scoring / rungs 1 and 2 climbing like methodology that you could do for relatively quickly and simply. I'm not going to get into detail here, but you could check out the EveryBot resources. On traverse climbing, let me see if this video plays here. Maybe it's not. Oh, well. All right. I'll talk about it. Here we go. Yeah. So when we're looking at traverse climbing, the video here I've got on the left is a sample that one guy posted on Chief Delphi and then sent everybody. A lot of people have viewed it since then, but this is like the de facto simple way to monkey bar that's equivalent to what was done in 2013. So I expect we'll see a lot of these types of robots because this type of mechanism works. You essentially use your center of gravity paired with like a stationary stick and a telescoping arm, and you're able to get all the way to the third rung. There's going to be some teams that work on skipping the high rung. So that's going to be pretty, it's going to be tricky. What you have to do is, it's like this video that we just watched here, but these little clips, you'd have to get your clips all the way down at the bottom of your robot, so you can turn your robot enough so you can extend within frame perimeter requirements all the way out to that third rung. So there will be teams that skip it, but it's going to be tricky, and probably the more consistent way is going to be going from rung to rung. Another option is the wall climbing that some teams have shown here, because this has been, by my view anyway, according to the Q&A, ruled illegal, where essentially you drop a wall or a wheel on either side of your robot, run into the side of the wall, and then basically skip all the other rungs, grab onto the traverse rung, because your geometry barely makes it so you can reach that top rung. I will say, with this graphic over here on the far right, you'd probably expect that your wheel, that is the wheel that's touching the wall, is probably going to need to be a decent bit higher in order to get the leverage required to climb up it. But in general, like, this is one of those things that is kind of creative, and I think we'll probably see some robots that do this. It also puts a frame perimeter constraint, so you're stuck being, at least according to this geometry, 36 inches, and you also have to watch to make sure that you don't break the acrylic that is on the Alliance Station wall when you do it. So you got a couple things that you have to worry about, but it's very creative. I really like wall climbing ideas. So I hope we see some teams do this effectively. So there are obviously different levels of competition. You design your different robots are good at different levels of competition. For example, at the IRI Chessy Champs level, I'd be you have to be very, very good in order to get picked as a logo robot, but while not because you don't have the autonomous in order to do those you don't have the extra autonomous points that the other robots would essentially. But there's a whole bunch of different levels of competition here, and each one are going to play very differently. Where at the district regional level, you're probably going to have two robots that can score really effectively, and like a third. And then the region champs level, you're probably going to have two robots that can score very effectively, and a third who can score kind of effectively. In world championships, you're probably going to have three robots that can all score very effectively, and then at the highest level, you're going to have three elite robots. So fitting how you fit into those alliances is pretty important when you design your robots. One thing to keep in mind here, this graphic's been thrown around in Chief a little bit. This is by year going across. The blue bar is the number one seed winning the alliance, what percent of the time. So the number one alliance wins 55% of the time. So, the one of the ways to be successful, at least at the competition aspect of FRC, is try to be on the number one alliance. If you can't be on the number one alliance, the number two alliance is second for that, but they're substantially lower. So, targeting the number one alliance, good idea in general. Now, how to enhance your chance of being picked. A couple different ways. One, reliable robot. Two, make sure your drivers practice. Three, have the scoring opportunities that people need. Number four is make friends. And five, drivetrain that can play defense. So we will go into those really quick. Reliable robot. So I've got 2056 because they're over here because they're essentially kings of reliability out of Ontario here. That one of the best teams in the world. So my general rule of thumbs here, we don't have a bag day now. So a lot of teams can get away with one robot, though you may need to replace components on that robot as they wear out. So what you could do is first assembled quote unquote robot by about 4 weeks before your first competition is generally a good rule of thumb. If you fully debug it, or at least as much as you can by weekend before your first competition, try really hard not to break and keep your bumpers on. This is really the key here. On the scoring side too, teams that there's been a lot of climbing in recent years, teams that climb every time, they're going to be viewed as more reliable from a scoring perspective, and as such be more likely to be picked because their net points are higher. Practice driver. So you can there's no rule about how young your drivers need to be. You could go as low as 7th or 8th grade if you wanted to. I know quite a few teams that have. There's some teams that have started drivers as low as 6th grade and then run them all the way through seniors. It's just one of those things that you find the reliable person if you could take the variability out of, like, will the driving be good? I don't know, right? Then you can it's one less thing that you need to worry about. So it's you can use the off seasons to get lots of driver stick time, lots of opportunity to play there. For the teams that have access to off seasons. For those that don't, I would highly suggest that you try to start them. Getting lots of off seasons and everyone playing lots of off seasons, more play time is good. You want as much play time as possible. There's you could also drive an FTC and Vex, and that's another way to get more experience with with driving as well for your drivers. I've ran drivers that did both FTC and driving in FRC, and they were always better. And obviously, someone who shows up to practice, if they don't show up, they shouldn't be driver. Um, Additional scoring opportunities. So things that you want to think about here, understanding how the game pieces recycle. So this year, most years, a lot of years, it's either they get scored and they're done, or they get scored and they go to your opponent, like last year. So this year, they get scored and they go to random location. So that's a very different thing than what we've had in the past. You can watch other games to get a good idea for cycle times. So this year in 2012, they could hold 3 balls at a time, and there were 18 balls in play, and you could score balls of either color, or all the balls were the same for everybody. This year, you've got 22 balls in play, but you can only use 11 of them, and you can hold 2 at a time. Sound sort of similar in proportions, right? So you can look at 2012 to get a good idea about what cycle times would work for this game. 2013, the pyramid climb, a lot like the rung climb that we've got here, though you've got less restrictions than we had in 2013. So this climb should be a lot easier. So don't hold yourself necessarily to 2013 for climbing, but it's very similar. Constrained endgame space. So how many robots can fit across on that traverse rung? It's a good question. So it depends on where you position the robots. Is one of them kind of like hanging underneath the truss, so you can fit 3 across? That's always one of those things that people. It's almost always the hardest end game task that you'll see a lot of top teams maybe strive for, depending on if they feel like it or not. If they feel like they'll get the output out of it that they need. So keeping in mind here, you've got I've got some examples of constrained endgame space. So you've got suction climbers 2019, the buddy climbs that people did in 2018. In 2016, the rungs were against against a wall. So what some teams would do is they grab on it and then they twist the back end of their robot so they could get 2 climbers that would scrub their bumpers on either side to lift, so they could get more points that way. And obviously the traverse rung this year, where you've got, I believe, 7 feet of space. When you consider each robot is 120 inches around, a lot of them are going to be wide. Some of them are going to be on the longer side. Fitting 3 robots there might be a little bit tricky. So, thinking about how that's done, if it's even possible, you can kind of talk about that. I think it's possible. It's just one robot has to be like hanging under the truss, which is, a different climber configuration, are very hard. So lots to think about there. So keeping in mind how many of each robot can do each task. So for example, in 2017, you had 3 climb stations. Each one was worth 50 points, and it was a probably easy to medium level task. And if you didn't do it, your team was out 50 points and was probably going to lose. So, there's certain tasks that sometimes come along, like the climbing last year was one that you seriously hindered yourself by not having a climber. This year it's not as bad because the points are a lot more balanced. Although the low rung and the mid rung are pretty easy relative to there's just a ton of COTS options out there for those. The Everybot has a great example of how to do it with the essentially a piece of wood that flips up and grabs on it. So even the mid level there. So it's being able to do those low and mid level rungs at a minimum is going to help a lot. So you really don't want to skip on those, because a low rung is worth essentially a cycle here, and then a high rung is worth a cycle and a half in the high goal. So making friends, teams do tend to bias picking teams that they're familiar with. So I've got the IRI 2019 winning alliance here. 2056, 1114, they've obviously played together a lot. And 195, one with 2056 in the prior year at IRI. So, and essentially they were playing defense there because 2056 knew they would be good at it, even though they hadn't played a whole bunch of defense all the game in that competition. So it's some stuff that you want to there's kind of like an adult mentor network that kind of goes around in obviously teams will, if there's a big disparity in performance, they're going to go with the teams that are better performing in almost every case. But if all things being equal, they'll tend to bias toward people that they know. So one of the tricks that you can always do with things like this is just make sure you do the effort to go out and meet people, because it seems so simple, but it can really help with things like this. You don't have to be like asking for help and pandering and stuff like that. That's not what this is about. This is about just being friends with people, and it tends to, if you do that, your network will grow pretty big in FRC. So Drivetrain that can play defense. I've got especially in a year like this where the game pieces are a little bit constrained and you might find yourself in a spot where you don't have anything to do on the field. It's time to go, run and hit somebody else, right? To try to disrupt their scoring. So there's some types of Drivetrain either have rollers that make it so it's harder to push, or you've got the like in the case of Mechanums, you've got part of your force is dispersed to the side, so you can't push your way out of situations, and it's really hard for you to play that role. It just you'll see teams that build exclusively for offense. They're typically going to be also reducing the mass on their robot to a really small amount. I think for the vast majority of teams, you're going to want to have either essentially tank or swerve drive to make sure that you can get yourself out of these defensive situations, because there's going to be, otherwise you'll find yourself in spots where someone hits you, you miss your shots, and then you're it just feels like a bummer sometimes with those, that it's when someone can play defense on you and essentially just shut you down. And then you can't do the same to somebody else when you need to play that role. So, just food for thought here. Something teams should consider. Remember, your competition robot's not done. It's a constantly iterative process here. We have no bag, so people will be working on the robots after the season ends. People will be overhauling complete mechanisms. There's a whole bunch of stuff that people will be doing to transition between competitions here. So just stuff to worry about. Obviously you can go on the Blue Alliance to watch lots of matches to do some scouting. Scouting, a lot of people make more scouting out more complicated than it needs to be. It's essentially, do you have an idea about what's going to happen in the next match based on what happened in prior matches? Do you know where on the field people are going to do things at, so you can stop them if you need to? It's all match prep. We'll keep going. Places to stay informed, obviously Chief Delphi, FRC Discord, FRC blog posts, email blasts, all the matches that show up on the Blue Alliance. You go there after somebody, if somebody does something in California, somebody does something in Canada, somebody, pick. Honestly, if anyone's talking about any robot, you probably want to go to the Blue Alliance and check them out, because the more you know, the easier it is to make good assessments when you actually get out there on the field. And the Open Alliance is a good resource here. Keeping in mind, it's pretty saturated now. So I've highlighted 3847 because they do a really good job with that. But what a good way. Sometimes it's tricky to know who, when you're a team, no one's really assessing your resource level but you. And if you're checking for someone else to assess your resource level, they may or may not be someone who's done the due diligence to be informed on all these things to know what's optimum at that resource level. So this gets to be a really hard thing to do. So teams tend to like overscope or underscope as such, and really they should be somewhere in the middle. So the best thing you can do is try to stay as informed as possible. And if you can do that, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of assess like, okay, what am I capable of? What type of robot should I build? How should I build it? And then if you just try to make sure you get enough practice, you'll have a really good season. All right. Any I think that's all I got. So you can go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Questions. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we are waiting for some questions. We are checking the chats and waiting for questions. We have a question. Do you examine trailers and make possible robot sketches before kickoff? If so, what game element were you expecting this year? And were you ready for cargo as an element? I guess they meant like balls. Were you expecting balls this year? Because
We didn't expect it.
Was not expecting balls given that we've had balls in 2019, 2020, and the overflow in 2021. I think I'm glad we had balls again because I think there's some elements of this game that are consistent from what was done in 2020 and 2021, and there's a lot of teams that are essentially rebooting. So it makes it easier for them.
yeah, that's right. We have another question too. As a robot in 3 days team, what is the most challenging element while making a robot besides managing the time limit?
When I would say when we did robot in 3 days, the most challenging thing is trying to make sure that you have components that you can essentially try to tackle any challenge that shows up because you can't wait on suppliers to ship you things. You have to have everything there.
Yes, as an example, here in Turkey, it takes a lot of time to get stuff from and
Mhm.
like, so you need to prepare them before the season.
Yes. Yes. So that is the number one challenge.
Yes.
So let's just wait for a couple minutes. I think that's the end of our questions.
Also, when the live is finished, next day it will be uploaded as a video, so people can come and watch it again.
All right. Sounds good.
And there are no questions right now. And if they have any, they can definitely write you and watch your videos too.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks
you for
for-
coming. It was an enjoyable presentation.
And the people who are listening probably learned a lot from you. So thank you so much for coming.
All right. Thanks for having me.